William Randolph I, a gentleman cavalier, at the encouragement of his uncle Henry, came to seek his fortune in Virginia around 1670. His prosperity seemed guaranteed by two very big decisions he made during his first decade in the Old Dominion. The first was to stay neutral during Bacon's rebellion until he was assured of its outcome. The second was to marry Mary Isham, described as a much-courted belle, who was not only the principal heiress to her wealthy father, but who also brought many important family connections as well. According to Henry Lee, a marriage decides the happiness or misery always of the two, generally of more, and sometimes of many people. William and Mary Randolph became known as the Adam and Eve of Virginia because in a little over a century, there were at least 250 living descendants, and the family controlled more than 620,000 acres of Virginia real estate. A traveler once noted, "Wherever you find power, there was a Randolph." Of course, they were not alone at the top of the social pyramid. There were about 36 families who were known as the Tidewater aristocracy. Among these families, the Randolphs often intermarried. They are all brothers, sisters, or cousins, so that if you use one person in the colony ill, you affront all, wrote Mary Willing, William Byrd III's Philadelphia-born wife, meaning that if you upset one person in the colony, you upset them all. One of these branches, seated at Wilton in Henrico County, was established by William Randolph III, grandson of William I, and the son of William II, both of Turkey Island. Educated at the College of William and Mary, where his grandfather had been a founding trustee, William III was truly a pillar of the community. As a vestryman for the Henrico Parish for 15 years, he missed only 3 meetings during that entire period. He served in the militia and had progressive views about agriculture, being one of the first planters to use potash to improve the soil. A member of the House of Burgesses for 10 years, he was not known as a great leader, but did rank as one of the most influential members of the House because of his quiet, intelligent judgment. His marriage to Anne Carter Harrison of Berkeley united 3 of the most powerful families in Virginia. One of William's greatest accomplishments was his construction of a grand manor house. At one time, it was called World's End, either because of its relative remoteness or because it sat on a high bluff overlooking the James River, which, in those times, helped to define the limits of the civilized world in Virginia. Built in the early Georgian style, popular in the first half of the 18th century, Wilton was already outdated as it was being built. One writer observed, "It was as though he had chosen to make his house the architectural crown jewel of a style that had gone before, rather than experiment with the increasingly popular neoclassical style that was to be interpreted so successfully by his cousin Thomas Jefferson. His tastes were superb. Out of the native clay and surrounding forests, he managed to create an architectural masterpiece that epitomized the Georgian ideals of proportion and balance." Georgian architecture was based on the ideas of the 16th century Italian Andrea Palladio, but with a distinctly British accent. In the words of one writer, it's a style that looks at ease with itself and makes people feel at home. It is formal, but the beauty of its formality frames us and makes us look and feel good. Georgian rooms naturally suggest music. They were designed to hold dancers. Guests walked into the hall that spanned the length of the house and gave access to every room, creating the circulation necessary for the dances and routs of which they were so fond. Completing his masterpiece in 1753, William had only about 8 years to enjoy the fruits of his labors before his death in 1761 at the age of 38. For all the blessings that Providence seemed to have showered upon the Randolphs of Wilton, one important one was denied them, and that was long life. William left his young widow with the responsibility for rearing 6 children and managing more than 22,000 acres of land on her own. She acted as the executor of the estate and managed the plantation with skill and determination, caring for travelers as well as for family. She never remarried and remained at Wilton until her death sometime after 1793. She evidently was as skilled a hostess as she was a manager, as Wilton remained a familiar destination for many of the most prominent people in the colony. In 1775, Washington rested there for several days on his return trip from the Virginia Convention, where he had witnessed Patrick Henry's immortal call for liberty or death. In 1781, then-Governor Thomas Jefferson visited Lafayette, who was headquartered at Wilton, while 900 of the general's troops bivouacked in the fields in a campaign that would eventually end in victory at Yorktown. Tragically ironic, all of Anne's children predeceased her. Peyton, her youngest son, did live long enough to inherit Wilton upon reaching his 21st birthday, but died only a few years later in 1784. Ownership of Wilton eventually passed to his son, William IV, who died at an age of 35 in 1814, and then to William's son Robert, the great-grandson of Wilton's builder. Catherine Maria Sedgwick, a noted novelist from New England who visited Wilton in 1833, wrote, "Dear Kate, yesterday morning a nephew of our friend Mr. Randolph of Wilton, this is their feudal manner of designating the proprietors of their great domains, called to see us and invited us to take a drive 6 miles to his estate of Wilton. His parents are dead, and this young man, a fine specimen of Virginia character, his face expressive of frankness and generosity, and his person of the fearless, bold habits of a country gentleman and sportsman, has succeeded to the estate. We went in a carriage, and he on a fine blood horse, and his cousin Harrison on the best horse he could get, attended us. The estate comprises 2,196 acres of land on the James River and about 150 slaves. The house is of wood and more than 100 years old. The spacious wainscoted rooms with high ceilings and broad staircases and a fine hall give you a very magnificent idea of the grandeur of its former proprietor, who, so long ago, has an establishment that wants nothing but fitting up to vie with modern elegance. But such ruin! Broken down fences, a falling piazza, defaced paint, banisters tied up with ropes, etc. The general aspect of the house is that of a forlorn ruin. The gallant young proprietor, she continued, vowed to repair it to its former glory, but his expensive tastes and generous nature left him in such financial distress that after his death, Wilton had to be sold in 1859 to settle his accounts. So, after a little more than a century, this architectural masterpiece was lost to the family forever. During the next 80 years, Wilton changed hands 4 more times until, in the depths of the Depression, the Bank of Commerce and Trust seized it through bankruptcy proceedings. It no longer served as an elegant setting for festivities or the comforts of family life, but rather as a hay barn, inhabited only by the ghosts of a glorious past and fodder for livestock. In 1932, the area was zoned for industrial development. It seemed that Wilton's death knell had sounded as the bank negotiated to sell Wilton's extraordinary paneling and then to demolish what remained. It was at this dark hour that the heroes in our story appeared to save the day, or rather the heroines. For when it came to historic preservation, it was nearly always the ladies who led the way. The Virginia Dames, under the leadership of Mrs. Granville Gray Valentine, came to Wilton's rescue. A less determined group might easily have been put off. To acquire Wilton would cost $30,000, a bargain considering a New Jersey antique dealer had offered $40,000 for the paneling alone. Another $8,500 would be required to purchase property on which to relocate the house, and even more money to have it dismantled, moved, and faithfully reconstructed at its new location. But the Dames persevered, and by selling bonds to themselves, they were able to finance the undertaking and became the 12th and final owners of Wilton on March 17, 1933. Only 22 months later, during January 1935, they held their first meeting in the house. Since that first meeting, Wilton has continued to offer its many visitors the magic of encountering the authentic, the opportunity to form a connection with all those who called Wilton home or enjoyed its hospitality in years gone by. The house at World's End is no longer a remote outpost of civilization, but an increasingly vital center for learning and entertainment. It is a tribute to the foresight, dedication, and continuing generosity of the Virginia dames, without whom Wilton could not exist. It might be appropriate to say, "Well done, thou good and faithful stewards, stewards not only of America's past, but of its future as well."